industrial growth sector, which is majorly dependent on pillars of people, technology, competitiveness, innovation, and access to regional markets. So the key pondering questions that I would like us to think about is, first and foremost, what happens when a country depends on it for its medicines? What happens when a country depends on another for medicines it needs every day? So those are some of the things I need us to look into deeply on why we need to strengthen local pharmaceutical manufacturing capabilities in Uganda. And secondly, we need to understand that what happens when medicines markets grow, yet there are no manufacturing capabilities for a nation. So those are some of the challenges some countries are facing. And also we need to understand that what does it mean for us as young entrepreneurs entering the pharmaceutical profession. So that is why it's important for us to view the pharmaceutical industry not only as a pharmacy issue, but rather as a health security issue, an industrialization issue, a technology issue, and also an issue that contributes to economic development of a nation. So as Uganda, we've been majorly guided by what we call the National Health Policy, which was adopted in 2010, and it was majorly focusing on promoting healthy and productive lives. So at the overlook of it, we've not been guided well under that policy into what we should grow into as a manufacturing sector. So that's why in the year 2015, there was a review and the drawing of a new plan which was called the National Medicines Policy. And the National Medicines Policy recognized domestic pharmaceutical manufacturing as contributive to public health, industrial development, and self-sufficiency. So looking at the pillars that were put into the National Medicines Policy, most of them were broad activities that did not really encompass on setting a direction for the ecosystem of our country. So eventually, there was an adaptation of this creating a development plan. And this began in the year 2020, where we had, at least, it began before 2020, but in 2020 we had an NDP3, which tried to follow a framework by the UN, which had their sustainable development goals. So these were adopted still to try to see how they would procreate and strengthen the local pharmaceutical manufacturing sector. Because at that time we had developed capabilities for close to, I think, 15 industries. So where we are right now, and I thank God I managed to be contributive of this agenda, we worked on what we call the National Development Platform. And under the National Development Platform, we realized that we needed to create what we call key performance indicators, timelines, and the objectives which were shorter to show where our industrialization should be as a country. So the NDP4 emphasized industrialization, private sector development, employment, and value addition as the key pillars which were centered on the objective that each industrialization process should follow in Uganda, including the pharma sector. So what is lacking as a key challenge, and this goes to our regulators, our government officials, is unlike other countries, we've lacked a policy alignment which bridges all the entities into what we call an ecosystem that is supportive to the development of the pharmaceutical sector. So due to lack of policy, we do not have a right direction as a country. So coming back to our point, I want to give the team an overview of where we are. So where we are currently, I don't know if someone can help me with the presentation. I show it. Industry started with import dependence. We never used to have local manufacturing capabilities in the country. We majorly depended on imports. However, we see the trend going to local pharmaceutical manufacturing, and by the year, I think around 1992 or 5, we had one company, it was called UPL, it's closed down. So we see that from that trend we've gone to DMP strengthening. That's the period where we had the adoption of the law to create NDA. NDA came up, and then currently we diversified into production of generics as local manufacturers, to tech transfer. So currently, as a country, we are at a phase of tech transfer. We have not yet gone ahead to regional manufacturing and advanced manufacturing as yet. So the key focal point we understand of this direction setting is that the question is no longer whether Uganda should manufacture medicines, but it is whether we can build manufacturers that are competitive enough to supply Uganda, ESC, and our wider African market. So when you look at also the ecosystem for the manufacturing of API from finished products, so we are going to be having manufacturers starting up into API and formulation, then into production, QC, up to the patient age. That's just an ecosystem which shows the product flow at each stage of process of development of drugs. And at each step, there are different professional job activities that can be incorporated, so meaning that there is a lot of value chains of jobs that can be created across all that ecosystem under the pharmaceutical manufacturing chain. So, as the Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Association, the data we have with the country as well shows that we do have a total of 67 pharmaceutical manufacturers in the country. And from the data we estimated by the year 2026, the direct and indirect employment estimate is around 15,000 for the jobs produced by the industrial sector. So investments in the sector have increased drastically, especially in the recent 2 to 3 years, whereby we have over $600 million that has been invested in the sector. So what we haven't calculated from where is the pharma market, we had a pharma market of around $450 million by the year 2019. So we've not yet done statistics to improve on this, but by that time, it was contributing to around 0.16% of the GDP. So we are looking at our sector growing at a rate of 6% from 2026 to 2022. That's as by the research for this year, 2026. And we estimate that currently the global pharmaceutical sector is able to supply at least 20% of the needs for the 20% of the needs of the products. So regarding the direct job sections which exist in the pharmaceutical industry, I've managed to list down quite a number of them, from R&D, formulation development, technology transfer, production, HR, going all the way up to distribution. I need to emphasize on data analytics. We are really lacking a lot of people to do with data analytics. Also, somebody has mentioned pharmacovigilance. That's a niche which is a bit lacking currently. Then also market access, because of the dynamics around the African market. So the understanding of market access is still a bit limited to the majority of manufacturers. So for the applicants in the industry, what they majorly struggle with is an understanding of where to place themselves in the pharmaceutical industry. Most focus on money instead of identifying the opportunities that are being opened up to them, and this can kindly take you off the trajectory in regards to the development in the sector. So one of the key things which I've also managed to bring you is an understanding that the manufacturing industry has a multiplier effect in terms of the capabilities of jobs it creates. So there is a research which was done. Let me try to expand on it here. When you look at this figure, that is where we have our developing, and then there are different scales we see in the graph. But according to the graph, when you look at the top agriculture, it means the jobs which are created under the agriculture sector, they are quite small, according to the research. Then under the manufacturing sector, it has the longest span in terms of the jobs being created. So this research was done in comparison to non-manufacturing industry, services industries, But you realize that wherever you realize that the manufacturing sector has the largest potential to generate jobs compared to these other sectors. So on average, 1.7 jobs are created domestically, whereas 0.5 jobs are created outside the country. What that means is that wherever you set up, wherever you provide employment to one person in the manufacturing sector, so it's going to create 1.7 value chain jobs locally and the 0.5 jobs under that same value chain externally. I'm going to delve down on it. For example, Timatuga, I remember one time we had around 5,000 workers on site. And we had a gentleman who visited the site. He told us that if I told you to provide, for example, milk to 5,000 workers on site, if roughly a cup of milk is 1,000 shillings, such a person would be literally making maybe around 5 million a day. So if you have a contract to supply for 30 days, you can literally make close to 150 million. So it shows you the value chain. So if you can produce such a value chain to somebody who's merely supplying milk, then think of the one growing cattle, rearing cattle. Think of the one providing inputs to the person rearing cattle and all. So literally, manufacturing worldwide, as per this study, shows you that it's the way to go in terms of providing jobs to the people in the country. So traditionally, when it comes to career opportunities, people used to view the growth in career opportunities from a pharmacist into somebody working in a hospital to community pharmacy and regulatory affairs. There was really nothing expounded on regards to pharmaceutical manufacturing. But where we are currently as Uganda, when you look at the value chain under the modern pharmaceutical industry presentation, we see that there is a directional setting from a pharmacist growing into areas in manufacturing, growing into QA, QC, regulatory, R&D, entering into supply chain, into industrial leadership, and eventually into entrepreneurship. Though what I advise people who are new into the profession is not to aspire so early for placements that are so high, whereby you get into a role that has a lot of responsibilities that you cannot really contain with your capabilities. As you see per the chain that I've displayed there, that's the chain which shows you the trajectory of growth. So when you become a person into placement for industrial leadership, it's essential that you must have passed through all these steps. So there are also non-pharmacy professional opportunities from chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, biologists, biochemists. There are different IT specialists, accountants, procurement specialists. And one thing which for me interests me here, I remember I was in my P7. I had a professor from South Africa who came and told me that the future of people who will change Africa will be people that study biochemistry. I didn't understand that by that time, and it has taken me a lot of years to grow into the sector to really know that currently, from what I've been exposed into in the biotechnology, vaccines production, and also designing of biosimilars, I've come to realize that it's very important for us as the younger generation to take biochemistry seriously, even chemical engineering. That's where the key people who are going to innovate the things we want in Africa are going to come from. So, this shows you that at least the pharmaceutical industry is one of the few sectors where you have science, engineering, medicine, business, law, and technology converging all together. So we really appreciate what it brings for us in bringing all these professionals in the same working environment. So I would have expounded on career studies, but this is where mentorship is key for all of us. Many of you know known pharmacists, known industrial specialists in different sectors. It could be in regulatory, in industry, in research. I have Eva here. We've worked together on developing guidelines, I think. So she's so good in research. So there are people you can always link up with that they help you to grow in your career. So mentorship is quite pivotal in our profession. So this shows you that the pharmaceutical sector tends to teach you that this profession does not make you to be a person who's only thinking of dispensing medicines as a primary role. So as Uganda, we've had several growth frontiers. I'm going to categorize them into the kind of models that we have as a country. So we are advancing into advanced formulations. At least some 2 to 3 companies are getting there. We've had at least one of the evidence from our colleague from NALO telling you about how they are developing vaccines. So we are entering modified release formulation designs, complex generics, oncology. At least at our factory, we are working on a large portfolio of close to 15 oncology products currently. So pediatric formulations, NCD medicines. So these are some of the areas where factories in Uganda are starting to grow into. So when you look at these formulations, a mention of them should not be looked at to you as people who want employment opportunities or wider opportunities that you have as people who want to grow in this sector. So we are also entering specialty medicines, and by the look of the ESC roadmap, it specifically identified advanced formulations and also these niche products as opportunities which can be looked at by people who really want to grow in this career. So another frontier which Uganda is facing is the development of biologics and vaccines. We understand that biologics do not really work like small molecules. So the clinical research needed for you to validate their functionality is a bit different, and this is an area most of us are going to be exposed to, and we are starting to learn. So this includes vaccines, biosimilars, insulin, monoclonal antibodies, recombinant proteins, biotechnology platforms. And also, we can understand from this that the future is not going to be simply about fill and finish, but it's also going to be about owning technology and intellectual property rights, which happy my brother David there is driving. And as one of the people who has been in the vaccines market shaping committees, one of the key things I learned out of this is that if you do not possess the technology, you cannot sustain your performance in the market. So there's a company which I've been doing advisory for in working on it's an Ebola virus like it's a PLP platform for an Ebola vaccine, but they are trying to see how to take this out to the clinical trial phase 1. But when we started the analysis of this is, as a manufacturer, we realized that you could not compete in a market that is already dominated by several players. For example, we do have around 574 manufacturers in the African continent. But when it comes to the vaccine landscape, the mapped out manufacturers are like at 5. So if you go and analyze the Gavi market, you realize that the majority of vaccines supplied on the Gavi market are usually sourced from around 3 to maximum of 5 manufacturers. So it shows you that as broad as the manufacturing industries would be over 40,000 in the world, and you have less than maybe 300 in the vaccine landscape, it shows you the challenges they are high, the penetration in the market is difficult. So, and also the people who are there are fighting to retain that market. If you find only 3 suppliers of a vaccine, you go to the pentavalent. The pentavalent has, I think, around 2 dominant players. So it's not a landscape you can easily intervene and innovate something out of the day without the conjugative technology that you need to bring all these antigens together. So as Uganda, we are learning, but at least I'm glad that we are working with several players, government also supporting in ensuring that we have technology capabilities that are owned by Ugandans. And as the continent, we've seen STI supporting in side, we've seen national therapeutics supporting the entities that want to take their concepts into research. So world over in Africa, we are spending less than 0.5% of our GDP in research. But the developing countries we are competing with are spending somewhere around 3%, 5% of GDP in research. So if we do not invest in research and own IP rights to our items, we may not easily compete in the manufacturing landscape. So another concern which I'm seeing that Uganda we are staring into is sterile manufacturing. In this we have categories of products under IV fluids, injectables, ophthalmics, parentals. What interested me here, most of us have been used to what we call the blow-fill seal system, which has been used to manufacture parentals. But recently I was working on a production line in our facility, and this is the advantage of improving and understanding technology. So I've realized that there are countries which are moving to a BFFS system. When you realize that the BFFS system is kind of more lighter, it's faster in production, so it enables you to compete in terms of logistics handling. The person who's still using a non-BFS system in manufacturing parentals. So we are getting there as a country, and I'm happy that these capabilities are being set up by manufacturers in the country to see that we have the latest technologies in sterile manufacturing being adopted. Even the lyophilization platforms we are working on now are fully automated, because as per the new upcoming guidelines under ICH, you won't require anything that requires manual loading of anything in a lyophilizer, as it's currently a modus operandi in some factories. So also we can look at API manufacturing. This is where I think we should put focus as a nation. We've not learned a lot about it, but in Matuga we are working on excipients, which are for making starch from cassava. But in this landscape, you can easily get your active ingredients, then formulate them into an API, you do packaging and sell it. So this currently is on a very small scale by players who are doing it in an unregulated way. So they have not yet developed what we can call pharmaceutical capabilities. But in the future, we can have API development being turned into formulation, to finished products. Then we start regional export. So this, to me, it carries a lot of interest to me, because when you look at the countries which are dominating it in the world, it's majorly India and China. And now India has set up a strategy to ensure that it maps out some key APIs that it wants to produce. But when you look at the additives and the reagents they need, they have to source them from China. And China, the market of APIs and excipients, it can control the entire value chain. So you don't have to fight a country like that. You only have to find ways of how you collaborate and develop the capabilities that you can in your country to similarly do something that you can do. For example, I managed to visit a site where they are planting cassava into the development of starch. I looked at the species. I compared this to the data we have in India, and you're looking at the Indian yield per acre. It's quite exorbitant compared to our yield per acre here in Uganda. So there are different issues we face, like drought, lack of facilitation to ensure that the plants have water in ground area, and this also makes the productivity to be seasonal and low. Then we also have things like species being disturbed. So it has shown me that we need to understand where we are as a country, what is our environment, how do we change the productivity of our crops, which is actually possible. Because I've seen some researchers are working on developing drought-resistant species, especially there's a university I had an interaction with in this platform. So it means these things are possible. If others are doing them, we can change our country, start doing something, because we have the land, we have the good climate. So it's all about understanding where we want to go, what is the policy that we need to enable us to get where we are, and we've ensured that we find a niche in API manufacturing. But I'm glad that Uganda is on trend in this landscape. So, on the local manufacturing R&D, we have several opportunities. But one of the questions that I want us to ponder on here is that are we going to remain consumers of technologies developed elsewhere, or will Uganda develop technologies for African health problems? So I'm glad that NARO is working on development of vaccines. When you develop a vaccine platform, the advantages of it is that it can be remodeled into developing several types of vaccines. So I'm happy that they are taking on that kind of research. It shows you that as Uganda, we are not looking at our inabilities in terms of maybe skills or money or lack of know-how like it could be elsewhere, but we are using the little we have to ensure that it gives us a starting base to enter areas in R&D. So the opportunities there include formulation in R&D, natural therapeutics, and in Uganda, this also we've heard of Dr. Sempuka working on anti-diabetics in the natural therapeutics landscape. We've heard of an innovation which was done by Dr. Magola in the malaria out of natural therapeutics. And all these are going through different stages of characterization of the products and ensuring that they reach clinical trials for phase 1 at least. So we thank our government for this direction it's taking for our innovators. So we also have drug delivery innovations. This is not an area we've really touched as a country, but from other countries in Europe, I've seen a lot of people are patenting ideas to do with drug delivery methods to change the way drugs are administered currently. And that is a landscape which is going to be a futuristic advantage to those that will get a pilot product out of it. So diagnostic technologies, these are also there. So what we've been having as a gap in diagnostic technologies was a lack of combined guidance framework. But due to the advancement in regulatory affairs, this is being looked into, and I think they are yet to come up with a combined framework to guide technologies validation and qualification. So we shall see many of those which do not have the right quality or the right requirements in terms of actual measurement of the doses required, they may get out of the market with the regulatory strengthening under. So the other areas are clinical research, bioequivalence capabilities, biotech. So in these two, one of the model countries I can point you to interface is Ethiopia. Ethiopia had developed a bioequivalence center, but it shut down some 4 years back, I think, due to lack of a market. But currently, they've started a vaccines industry, they've a health insurance platform, they've a large market of large population. So they've restarted their bioequivalence center, and it will provide support to the majority of companies in the region in the East. So I'm gonna go about to close, but the other pillar which I want to talk of is regional market expansion. And my advisory to companies setting up in Africa is that they should set up with a focus on competitiveness in Africa, but not only in Uganda. So we are also entering a phase of digitization. Here we see the adaptation of Industry 4.0, which requires automation, data integrity, and we are going to need specialists who are good in data analytics to use this. And I'm glad this year, in June 2026, the International Society of Pharmaceutical Engineers sat with people who are also developing the ICH guidelines. So they are transforming Industry 4.0 into Pharma 4.0, which may create pillars that are used to create what we call ECTD. So after the evaluation of ECTD, this may eventually be cascaded down into processes in the industry. So this digitization we need to adopt it as a country. So in pharmaceutical entrepreneurship, what I would ask of young professionals is not to be asking where will I get a job as an individual, but rather ask yourself what problem in the pharmaceutical value chain can one build a business around? So there are examples: contract manufacturing, cold chain, DNP consulting, and all. So here comes the last bit as I'm winding up. One of the key things we need to understand as a country is we are facing the reality of competitiveness, and this is faced by many local manufacturers when it comes to stages of scaling businesses, the cost of capital, technology gaps, skill shortages, regulatory compliance shortfalls, product availability, quality consistency. These are the challenges they are currently facing in the expansion. And when it comes to the skill sets, what I managed to note down as the skill sets of the future will be technical competences, regulatory competences, business competences, digital competences, leadership competences. So these are some of the skills I pointed out for the future. And my question there is that being technically competent will get you into the industry, but understanding business, technology, and strategy will determine how far you go in the industry. So the key challenge to young professionals currently, as my closing remark, is that currently Uganda does not only need pharmacists, Uganda needs pharmaceutical scientists, manufacturing leaders, regulatory experts, engineers, entrepreneurs, researchers, and business strategists who can build the next generation of African pharmaceutical companies. The opportunity is not simply to find a job in pharmaceutical manufacturing, but the opportunity is to become part of building an industry. And finally, the future pharmaceutical industry in Uganda will not be built by importing finished products. It will be built by Ugandans who acquire the knowledge, technology, capital, and ambition to create competitive solutions for Africa. Thank you very much, everyone.